Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Federal authorities track and arrest Capitol rioters across the country as new security threats emerge.
The wrongdoers will be held responsible.
A convicted rapist is sentenced for a cold case, but this isn't case closed yet.
Probably some of the most horrific facts I've read in a long time.
And the only woman on death row is executed after the nation's highest court overturned her appeals. Plus, should an accused murderer get state money to help pay for his defense? The latest legal battle in the disappearance of a Georgia beauty queen.
They're looking for experts, and they don't have money for experts.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. The nation's top prosecutor is speaking out against the Capitol insurrection.
Lives were lost. The storming of the Capitol was an intolerable, shocking, and tragic episode in our nation's history. Some charges were brought the very next day. Those efforts remain active and will continue until justice is done. In the last week, more than 70 individuals have been criminally charged. We've opened more than 170 investigations. The FBI has gathered more than 100,000 digital tips from the public, and there is a lot more to come. The Department of Justice will seek to hold any violators accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
Those comments come nearly a week after video of the deadly assault was broadcast around the world. USA! USA! Rioters stormed the steps of the Capitol building on January 6th.
Next wave!
A mob seen pushing towards the front doors as an officer's shield is taken.
Let's go! Let's go! Take it!
This video, taken by a group called Status Quo, appears to show the mob using pepper spray and tasers. One officer becoming trapped between the doors. The group continuing to push forward. The officer, now without his mask, is bleeding and screaming for help. DC's acting police chief says that the officer was able to free himself and is recovering.
It makes me sick to my stomach to see that video, and that officer, obviously, he was afraid for his life.
Federal authorities continue to make arrests, including a man seen wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt while storming the Capitol building.
The initial charges everyone's familiar with, the zip tie guys, the Munchels, and the Brocks that were arrested on the House floor with zip ties rifling through the House floor. People are familiar with online. They see the Barnetts and Johnsons who were literally rifling through Pelosi's office and stealing items, stealing materials, mail, and sometimes even personal mementos. We're looking at significant felony cases tied to sedition and conspiracy. And it's going to come into laser focus, I think, over the next weeks and days. And I think people are going to be shocked with some of the egregious conduct that happened within the Capitol.
Law and crime expert and veteran SWAT team member Lisa Lockwood says authorities are not only looking into the actions of the rioters, but also the actions of law enforcement.
Well, the first thing they're looking at is the officers who were actually on duty that day. So they're in uniform and it's easy to identify. They can take a tally to find out who was there, what part of the perimeter were they in charge of, and they actually see the video on the inside. We know that Officer Goodman was the hero of the event who actually led the protesters through the building to get them away from the Senate entrance. So that was a phenomenal act of courage and thinking on his feet in that instance. The two that are suspended, that's my understanding, is because they were leading protesters around to another entrance. We don't know the full story. Were they leading them around to get them away as well? We don't know, unfortunately, at this stage of the game, because it is an ongoing investigation. But they're using all of the tools that they have. 100,000 pieces of digital evidence has come in, so it's going to take quite a bit of time to scour through all of it.
Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Gigi Gonzelez along with Terri Austin. Gigi, acting U.S. Attorney General Rosen said charges so far are placeholders for larger crimes. Can you talk about felony murder, one of those charges that he said is on the table?
Felony murder is a killing that occurs during the commission of a violent crime. And here we saw the deaths of multiple people, including an officer, during the planned attack on the Capitol by armed insurrectionists. Anybody that was involved in storming this Capitol is going to be facing potential felony murder charges, as these killings and murders were reasonably foreseeable under the circumstances.
Now, Terri, these cases are not all being heard in D.C., but instead are spread throughout the country in different federal courts. Why?
Well, Brian, just to be clear, there will be federal charges filed in D.C. District Court, along with state charges filed in D.C. Superior Court. But as you correctly state, attorneys in Ohio, Minnesota, Kentucky, and other states, they've said and they've pledged to prosecute anyone who traveled from their areas to take part in these riots. And right now, more than 160 case files have been opened and 70 people have been charged so far. And I definitely think that we're going to get some convictions.
All right, so that makes sense. It might not just be where they ended up, but where they traveled from, where that case may start. Thank you both. And now for a piece of good news before we go to the break. The family of a teenage girl who escaped her kidnapper after he killed her parents 2 years ago says she's happy and doing well. Jamie Kloss was just 13 years old when she fled a Wisconsin cabin following 88 days of captivity in January 2019. Her captor, Jake Patterson, pled guilty to killing the teen's parents, James and Denise Kloss, and forcing Jamie away in his car. Patterson is currently serving a life sentence. Jamie's aunt and legal guardian posted on Facebook that she's enjoying dance, school activities, and is surrounded by lots of loved ones. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, for the first time in 70 years, the federal government executes a female. A man who admitted to kidnapping and raping a woman in 1978 is sentenced, as detectives in Kentucky try to link him to more crimes. Angenette Levy joins us with more on Michael Tate's case and her exclusive interview with a woman who survived the attack.
Yeah, Brian, Michael Tate was sentenced on those 3 charges he pleaded guilty to. They were kidnapping, sodomy, and rape. And that woman thankfully survived, as we've been discussing this week. Now, detectives in Boone County, Kentucky interviewed Tate in November of 2019 about that attack. And at the time, they said he actually admitted to committing multiple rapes in several states. Those detectives went to Tate after looking at cases that had similarities to an unsolved 1976 homicide. They resubmitted a fingerprint from the rape case, and it came back to Michael Tate. He said very little during his sentencing hearing.
This was a case early on we had been working with the Commonwealth to resolve, and I know that this recommendation was made to you after due consideration.
We believe that given the complexities of prosecuting a 40-year-old offense, that this resolution is in the best interest of the Commonwealth. The victim is in agreement. We'd ask the court to impose the agreed upon sentence.
Mr. Tate, I'm going to accept the recommendation of the Commonwealth. I've got to say, though, it's probably some of the most horrific facts I've read in a long time. So other than the fact that it will bring comfort to the victim, that she doesn't have to appear in court, and that she doesn't have to go through some of these things again. I assume that you've read her statement?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And while I understand in your statement as well, you talk about remorse, but in any event, really horrific acts completely changed her life. So it wasn't just an act or several acts in a night. It was something that pretty much deteriorated her joy of life. And so in other circumstances, I would reject this, but given these circumstances, I will accept it.
And the judge really seemed to question and seemed to be kind of unhappy about that 12-year sentence. But the victim, as you heard, she actually agreed to that. She really didn't want to return to Kentucky. She lives several states away now. And she also says that she hopes that Michael Tate will eventually confess to crimes that he told her he committed.
And that's what's most important to me, because I got through it and survived him. I feel for the little, if there's girls and young women out there that have been murdered and they don't know what happened to them, that's what really bothers me. So I wish he would admit to that. And I'll be praying for that every day before he passes, and maybe he'll do it.
And Michael Tate is 78 years old. He will be about 90 years old when he gets out of prison. The survivor said yesterday that she was happy after the sentencing, and with everything she's been through the years living with this, she says this makes her breathe a little bit easier. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. Now, is there any progress on the detectives matching up the rapes Tate confessed to?
You know, they're working on that. They said multiple rapes in multiple states. They have worked with an FBI task force officer to help piece some of these together and match the confessions with the crimes. They are still working on that. They haven't been able to match those other confessions with other cases. They're hoping people will actually come forward, and that could aid them in solving some of the cases.
Now, Terry, what do you think about the 12-year sentence for such a heinous crime? The judge seemed a little taken aback by the sentence.
She did seem taken aback, and I think it is a short amount of time. But, you know, as the party said, it's a 40-year-old case, and he is 78 years old. And, you know, research shows that each year in prison takes 2 years off of his life. His average expectancy is 75 years. So with a 12-year sentence, it means that he will likely die in prison. And couple that with the fact that the victim doesn't have to stand the scrutiny of a trial, I think it is a reasonable result, even though it is a horrendous crime.
Now, Gigi, now that we understand his MO through his confession, not only of this case, but in other crimes, do you anticipate that we possibly hear of other cases that he didn't confess to being connected to him?
Very likely. In his confession, he said that he targeted young women between the ages of 14 and 16 years old throughout the South and the East Coast. All detectives have to do is look throughout those cold cases where we had victims that were murdered by and were raped and sodomized, look for his DNA at those crime scenes to potentially connect him to those as well.
All right. Terry, Angenette, and Gigi, thank you very much for your input on the case. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the bold request from one of the... The federal government executed the first female inmate in nearly 70 years Tuesday night. Law and Crime's Terri Austin explains how last-minute appeals were overturned.
Brian, 52-year-old Lisa Montgomery died by lethal injection following a temporary stay and amid calls that her life should be spared. Montgomery was pronounced dead at approximately 1:31 a.m. She was convicted for the 2004 murder of Bobby Jo Stinnett, in which she cut Stinnett's baby from her womb and tried to pass the baby off as her own. A district court had stayed the execution, but the Supreme Court overturned that ruling in a late-night opinion. Several organizations advocated for Montgomery's sentence to be commuted, saying she suffered from mental illness.
But a lot of what the government points to as being premeditated is often actually a symptom of mental illness. As somebody who was forcibly sterilized, Lisa was fixated on having children. And so some of the evidence that the government has pointed to as indicating that this was a premeditated and very well thought through crime was actually a symptom of Lisa's mental illness and of her trauma.
Former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder and several ex-officials, according to reports, will soon be indicted for their role in the Flint water crisis. Problems with Flint's water can be traced back to 2014 when the city's water supply was switched by city and state officials in an effort to cut costs. The decision exposed residents to high levels of lead. 12 people died and over 80 residents became ill from Legionnaire's disease caused by the toxic water. Governor Snyder apologized for the crisis in 2016. Snyder's attorney calls the reports meritless and a political escapade. Could a tool used to fight fires actually be harmful to first responders? Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross has the report.
Thanks, Brian. Coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates, January is Firefighters Cancer Awareness Month. And now scientists and some firefighters are sounding the alarm about a chemical used to waterproof their turnout gear. Could it be a risk to the firefighters?
There's a strong correlation between the C8 form of this chemical and two types of cancer, testicular cancer and kidney cancer. But most of the firefighters aren't aware that they shouldn't be handling this stuff, and that's the issue.
The industry says the amount of chemical used is not enough to warrant concern. Other scientists disagree. We'll talk about it this week on Brian Ross Investigates. Back to you, Brian.
When we come back, an update in the murder of a Georgia beauty queen, one of the defendants seeks the state's help with his representation. Does his request stand a chance? Find out next. One of the defendants charged in the murder of a Georgia beauty queen is asking for state funds to help in his representation. Teacher and pageant competitor Tara Grinstead died in October 2005. Alleged killer Ryan Duke wants the Georgia Supreme Court to allow him to use government money to hire investigators and experts on his behalf. He's being represented by private attorneys for his upcoming trial, but they're working for free. Co-defendant Bo Dukes pled guilty in 2019 to helping him get rid of the body. The state's highest court first heard Ryan Duke's argument in 2019. Now, they say they have jurisdiction over the case and are considering the defense's request one more time.
Our opinion is that Mr. Duke did not sacrifice or waive his right to counsel of his choice simply because he elected to use pro bono counsel. If you look at the plain language of the statute, it certainly doesn't exclude pro bono attorneys. And if you look at the context of the language where other resources is contained, it follows right after the definition of indigency, which is someone who makes less than 150% of the poverty guidelines. So if you read those two pieces together, clearly the intent of other resources is other financial resources, which Mr. Duke admittedly does not have, and the state has not contended he has. The only contention here is that because he's able to get a free lawyer, that somehow constitutes other resources.
During the hearing, prosecutors said that the pro bono attorneys should be sufficient and Duke shouldn't qualify for state money.
He was represented by a public defender for, I believe, upwards of 15 months. However, at the time that Ms. Merchant reapplied for the public defender services on behalf of Mr. Duke, the local public defender did deny the services and indicated that essentially that he did have other resources, which were pro bono attorneys. And so at this point, he has been denied representation as having other resources.
The justices asked the prosecutor, how does she expect the defendant to pay for his experts?
Mr. Duke has the media attention that has come with this case, but for that
that brings no money with it.
It actually, I would respectfully.
What money? I mean, if Mr. Duke is indigent, as the trial court said he was, by definition, he does not have money for experts. The fact that he has notoriety is not monetizable, at least in any way that our justice system recognizes.
I would state that again, I would respectfully disagree, but for that notoriety, he wouldn't have these attorneys. They would never have heard the name Mr. Duke.
That is a very difficult argument to make. And you are telling that the state wants the criminal defendants to exploit their notoriety. In the federal system, there's a statute that says if defendants do that, all of the money forfeited to the victim. So, but you're saying that actually makes somebody a source of revenue that the state encourages.
I'm not encouraging that at all. I'm saying that's what's occurred in this case. But
so how's he supposed to hire an expert?
Would not. how's he supposed to hire an expert? He would remain with the public defenders through the IDA. That's
So,
what our
so
legislature
represented
has.
by the merchants, he has no ability to hire an expert. You would agree?
I agree.
Gigi, do you think a private attorney working pro bono should be able to use state funds to represent a client?
Yes, absolutely. Right now, indigent clients, they get appointed a public defender, or if a public defender is not available for whatever reason, then the court will appoint a private attorney, and the private attorney will bill the county accordingly. Here, you've got attorneys who are stepping in, representing the indigent client at a reduced rate, which is a benefit to the county, and you should allow the attorneys to bill the county for the experts and not for the attorney's fees. And right now, the precedent that could be set is either you better be too broke or so rich that you can afford experts to defend yourself with. Otherwise, you're not going to get a fair shake.
I mean, that's how it works in New York where I practice, and of course, Florida where Gigi practices. Terry, how do you think the judges will rule here?
I think the judge will rule the way Gigi just said. I'm in full agreement with her. They should allow for the payment of the same expert Ryan Duke would have received, whether he's pro bono, whether he's court appointed. It doesn't matter whether he represents himself because, you know, that's the due process argument.
Gigi and Terry, thank you for your input. And thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.